MTN SME Hub. Link to growth. Link to success. Link to the ultimate resource for business advice and insights.
Welcome back to the Big Small Business Show. Now, we've just been speaking to Rulani, and we understanding that there's big growth happening. And often when businesses grow, there's a great saying that more businesses die from indigestion than from starvation. In other words, they die because of growth, not despite it. And so what I've decided to do for us is to bring in somebody I know well. His name's Tendai Mujaji. He's a finance guide at Raise Corp, and he deals with hundreds of entrepreneurs in their growth phase and has seen all the mistakes that they make, all the things that they underestimate. So welcome to the Big Small Business Show.
Thank you, Allon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So one thing that I notice with businesses as they grow is before they run in a very unofficial way, and as they grow, they're forced to become more official and more, let's call it compliant. And so all these compliance costs start to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly had that experience where you find entrepreneurs in the early phases of growth, because of the need to formalize, then they must have these compliance costs, and that includes things like the annual returns that must be submitted to CIPC, and you've got COIDA, suddenly the Compensation and Occupational Injuries Diseases Act kicks in, and they must comply with that, and they want to then have their professional memberships and affiliations, and of course that must all be done, otherwise you just don't have credibility in the market, and often they get taken off guard by such costs. And
because allied to that, if you're going to do your annual financial statements, you're going to need an accounting firm.
Absolutely.
Before you might have done it on Excel, and you might have written your invoices out on a piece of paper or not,
absolutely.
But now you've got now somebody says,
I need financials. And suddenly you've got to pay an accountant, and the accountant charges significant fees for their work. And of course, that's then got to be dealt with. And oftentimes when the entrepreneurs come into our offices, it's like, I'm making the money, but I'm not seeing the profit.
Yeah.
And it's because of all these hidden costs that they were not thinking of before.
And one thing I also see is a BEE, right? The scorecard. And so many Black entrepreneurs who now have to have they have to have a BEE scorecard, because if they want to become a vendor, they have to, produce that scorecard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All those costs come into play, and obviously to go and get the relevant certifications, having the verification agencies come and do the audits costs money, and that's got to be accounted for some way, somehow. And then you end up having a negative cash flow, or you have cash flows that you don't anticipate as a result. So absolutely, the cost of compliance is not to be underestimated, and it's quite significant.
So let's talk about cash flow, because often you see that, and you say that there's this growth, and particularly when there's growth, there's a lot of money being tied up in stock, in new equipment, in people, etc. And if you haven't planned for that, there's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really one of the things that we sort of try to engage on early on, is to have a look at that sort of 1-year plan or whatever, just to get the entrepreneur out of their regular operational seat and say, okay, what are you expecting to happen over the foreseeable future? Therefore, what do you need to account for? And then you've got to go and think through, how many employees am I going to have? What does that mean from a cost point of view? How many pieces of equipment do I want to buy? What does that mean from a cost point of view? Am I financing the equipment? Am I putting it down a hefty deposit? All those things need to be considered. So absolutely, one of the key things that any entrepreneur needs to do is to spend some time budgeting and forecasting that cash flow, because otherwise you're chasing your own tail, and it's incredibly difficult to generate the revenues that will cover the cash that's going to finance all of that. Yeah.
So just coming back to that growth in terms of the people, right? So I don't know what you've experienced, but I certainly experienced that when companies are growing, they tend to hire quickly and therefore not hire so well. And therefore they land up with people that are probably inappropriate for those roles. And so there's this process of exiting individuals who are not performing, right? So you've got an additional cost to labor, so to speak, because you've got inefficient people in a role, and you can't put somebody else in there until they've left. And then there's also the cost, those other costs of actually, if you're going to use a recruitment firm, to pay for a recruiter.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The cost of bringing on new labor, as well as sort of letting it go because of those inefficiencies is real. Because certainly, and so many entrepreneurs, I mean, I've read articles and also seen it alive, spend many hours in CCMA because they didn't do their due diligence in terms of recruiting the employee.
Yeah.
And then further on to that, when the employee must exit, and if it's done in a way that's not amicable, that has a cost impact. And of course, yeah, you want to try and avoid those by probably trying to hire the employees more effectively and efficiently, because your cousins, brothers, uncles, aunt is just not going to cut it when it's time to grow.
But that you talk about another hidden cost, which is the time, right? Because when when you're growing, before you were doing the thing, now you have to bring somebody in, and then there's the time to train them, which is a hidden cost, because you also cost money per hour. You know, you've also got an hourly rate. So if you're using that not to sell or not to do something, and you're using that to train, there's a cost there. And then there is the cost of going to the CCM and the cost of all these other things to manage, so to speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And entrepreneurs often miss that cost. It's one of the big things that we certainly see when they come through the door, is that they don't understand the cost of their own time, and the impact of that on the business. So you'll tend to find that they're either then putting their money in their hands in the cookie jar, because now they're not compensating themselves for the time and effort that they're spending on the business. So then that again becomes a cost that suddenly hits the bottom line, and you're like, where's the money? But in fact, it's just not understanding that the value of their own time. Yeah.
Well, we have to get the money now. We have to go to an ad break. And when we come back, more questions for Tendai. Stay tuned.
MTN SME Hub, link to business success.